You always hear a lot of weird stories about big stores. At least, I always have. People are always complaining about how creepy they can be. Or they'll say they saw some crazy person inside. I never really experienced anything like that, though. I didn't even shop at places like that very much, just when it was convenient. That all changed after that night. I haven't stepped inside one of those stores again. It started when I got off work one evening. It was raining pretty hard outside, and I hate driving in the rain. It annoyed me, especially since I had been planning to buy a few last-minute groceries after work. I was hosting a girls' night, and I still needed to grab a few things. So, I decided to stop off at a nearby grocery store, thinking it'd be quicker than going anywhere else. When I got to the store, I tried to find a parking spot close to the front. But of course, they were all full. I had to park far from the entrance and walk through the rain to get inside. As I got closer to the doors, trying to shield myself from the downpour, something wild happened. Out of nowhere, a woman came screaming and running out of the store like a complete lunatic. I stopped in my tracks and watched as she sprinted through the parking lot, still shrieking as she went. It was unsettling, hearing someone in that much distress. For a moment, I hesitated. I wondered if something awful was happening inside. But after a few seconds, I convinced myself that she was just crazy. I'd finally gotten my own weird grocery store story to share with my friends later. The thought reassured me. So, I pushed open the doors and went inside. I grabbed a cart and quickly headed toward the grocery section. I didn't need much, but I still wanted to hurry and get home in time. While in one of the aisles, I felt something wet dripping on me. "What the hell?" I muttered, wiping it off. Whatever it wasn't water. I figured it was probably just rain mixed with ceiling mold or something. Gross. I glanced up to see if I could spot the source, but I didn't notice anything. I assumed it had just leaked through a hole in the ceiling. It was best to ignore it and move on. So, I picked up what I needed and went to the next aisle. As I was trying to decide what kind of chips I wanted, it happened again. Something wet dripped onto my head. I wiped it off and noticed that it was a much larger amount this time. It was disgusting. I still had no idea what it was, but the thought of something dripping on me from multiple places in the store was making me uneasy. I finished wiping it off and moved to another aisle, trying to ignore how gross it felt. I continued shopping for several minutes, but then, once again, I felt a wet substance drip onto me. Okay, what the hell is going on? By this point, I was annoyed. What were the odds that something had dripped on me 3 different times? I started wiping it off, looking up to try and figure out where it was coming from. But I couldn't see any sign of a hole in the ceiling. As I wiped the stuff away, I looked closer. It was some sort of white substance. It couldn't have been rain or mold. I didn't know what it was, but it smelled awful, like urine or something equally disgusting. The more I wiped, the more disgusted I got. There was quite a bit of it on me this time, dripping down from my hair onto my shirt. After a few minutes of cleaning myself off, I finally had enough and decided to leave before any more of it could get on me. As I turned to leave, I happened to glance up at the top of the shelf and saw the creepiest man I had ever seen, staring down at me with a wicked smile on his face. To my horror, I watched as he squirted a tube of the white substance directly at me. I screamed and ran to the front, shouting at the staff, "Please, you have to help me. There's a man squirting something at me in the aisles. He's insane." At first, they thought I was the crazy one, but I finally convinced them to send security to find the guy. They caught him in another aisle, trying to squirt the same substance on a different woman. The rest of the story can continue with these same pacing patterns, adding pauses and adjusting tones for dramatic or horrifying moments. I got a good look at him as security dragged him to the front. He was terrifying, and as they led him past me, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "The police came and arrested him. He was identified as a man named Timothy, notorious for harassing women around the area by squirting his bodily fluid on them in public places." I realized then why that woman had come running out of the store in such a panic. I've been traumatized by the whole ordeal ever since, and I still can't believe he did that to me. Not once, but 4 times. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't caught him, and I haven't been back to one of those stores since, just in case there's another lunatic like him lurking around. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident in 2017. A man named Timothy Blake was arrested for filling syringes with his bodily fluid and spraying women in stores. Police charged him after several complaints from female shoppers who reported being followed and sprayed with a suspicious sticky substance. Blake initially claimed it was a concoction made of egg yolk and flour, but later admitted to the truth after authorities tested the substance. He confessed to committing this heinous act dozens of times over a 2-month period. In the following days, I couldn't shake the feeling of disgust and fear. About my routine, I felt like I was being watched. The idea that someone could be so sick to prey on unsuspecting women like that haunted me. I told my friends about the incident, and while they were horrified, they tried to reassure me, saying it was just one freak occurrence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't something I could easily forget. The nightmares began almost immediately. I'd be walking through a grocery store, the lights flickering above me, the aisles stretching out endlessly, when suddenly, I'd feel that awful wetness drip onto me. When I'd look up, there he was, Timothy, smiling that disgusting, twisted smile, holding the syringe, ready to attack again. No matter how fast I ran, I could never escape him. I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. After a few weeks, I started seeing a therapist to help with the anxiety. She told me it was normal to feel this way after such a traumatic experience, and that over time, the fear would fade. I wanted to believe her, but it felt impossible. One night, I was sitting alone at home, trying to relax by watching TV. A news report came on, talking about Timothy Blake's court hearing. They showed footage of him walking into the courthouse in handcuffs, his head bowed as reporters shouted questions at him. Seeing his face again made my stomach churn. The reporter said that during the trial, Blake admitted to targeting over 20 women in a span of 2 months, and they suspected there were even more victims who hadn't come forward. I shuddered. I could have easily been one of those who stayed silent, too embarrassed or horrified to report what had happened. But I hadn't, and that decision might have prevented him from continuing his sick behavior. The trial went on for a while, but eventually, Timothy was sentenced to several years in prison for his disgusting acts. Hearing that gave me a small sense of closure. At least he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a long time. But despite knowing he was behind bars, my fear didn't completely vanish. Months passed, and I slowly tried to regain some sense of normalcy. I started going to therapy more regularly, focusing on my mental health. With time, I managed to feel a little less anxious, but I still couldn't bring myself to step foot in one of those big grocery stores. Even when I drove past one, my heart would start racing, and the memories would come flooding back. One day, while at work, I overheard a conversation between 2 of my coworkers. They were talking about a strange man they had seen hanging around the grocery store nearby. My heart dropped. Could it be someone like Timothy again? I interrupted their conversation, asking for more details. They described a man who had been acting suspiciously, loitering near the entrance of the store. It sounded all too familiar. The paranoia came flooding back, and I started to panic, thinking that maybe Timothy wasn't the only one out there doing this kind of thing. I ended up calling the police, even though I wasn't sure if it was the same situation. Better safe than sorry, I thought. I gave them a full description and explained everything that had happened to me months earlier. They thanked me for my vigilance and promised to look into it. After that day, I realized how fragile my sense of safety had become. Even the idea of something similar happening again sent me spiraling. But I refused to let fear control my life. Slowly, with the help of my therapist, I began facing my fears. I started shopping at smaller, local stores where I felt more comfortable. I always kept an eye on my surroundings and tried to stay aware of who was nearby. It took a long time, but eventually, I managed to reclaim some of the normalcy I'd lost. The nightmares still come now and then, and the memories still linger, but I'm not letting them control me anymore. If there's anything I've learned from this horrifying experience, it's to trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. I should have taken that woman's scream as a warning. I should have listened to that voice in my head telling me to leave the store. But I didn't, and I paid the price. No one should ever have to go through something like that. But if you do, just remember, there's always a way to heal, even if it takes time. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. And if you know someone who would benefit from this, feel free to share it with them. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel grow. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.